Thank you, Emily. Among the segments of our economy hardest hit by COVID-19, retail, including bars and restaurants, has faced considerable upheaval and uncertainty during the last year. But even before the pandemic, emerging trends and shifting consumer tastes were impacting retailers and their surrounding communities. As the economy reopens and business resets to the new normal, retail will continue to be a strategy of job creation, talent recruitment, fiscal diversification, and quality of place. Good morning, everyone. We're glad you're with us. I'm Sandy Dunbeck. I'm Interim Director of the High Point Economic Development Corporation, and we include retail as part of our recruitment efforts in addition to office and industrial. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Retail as an Economic Development Tool. This is the first in a two-part webinar series on this topic, sponsored by Electricities of North Carolina. In a moment, I'll turn it over to my friend and business colleague, Jennings Gray of Electricities, who will moderate the discussion. But first, there is a list of entities that make learning events like this possible. NCEDA's annual sponsors. Emily is scrolling their names across your screen now. NCEDA is grateful to these sponsors for their ongoing support for our mission around the clock and throughout the year. Thank you so much to these important sponsors. Few organizations are more generous in their support of the state's economic development community than Electricities of North Carolina, and no organization is more active in their advocacy of retail economic development as a strategy for community advancement. Jennings Gray is Senior Retail Development Specialist at Electricities. He has more than 14 years of experience in public and private economic development, local government administration, and corporate retail site selection consulting. Jennings works with North Carolina communities, including downtown development organizations, to develop, enhance, and implement retail recruitment strategies. He is an active member of NCEDA and many other professional associations. I'll now turn the webinar over to Jennings, who will introduce our guest speakers and moderate today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and I consider you a valued friend and colleague as well. And just we could do a whole presentation just on your accomplishments in High Point and through your leadership. You guys have done an excellent job and really serve as a model for retail and commercial recruitment and how to partner and be inclusive in your recruitment efforts with all the partners in High Point. So definitely a shining example in North Carolina. So thank you for that.
You're very kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Before I introduce our presenters, on behalf of Electricities, I would like to welcome you to today's NCEDA webinar. Electricities is a long-standing active partner and supporter of NCEDA. And for those unfamiliar with Electricities, we are a not-for-profit membership organization of municipally owned electric utilities, such as High Point, that are spread across North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. In addition to being an advocate, as Sandy mentioned, we also provide a multitude of services, support services, including economic development. I work in a department of 4 led by Brenda Daniels, which many of you know. My other colleagues are Carl Reese and Charity Barbie. Charity and I focus mainly on the retail recruitment and downtown development areas of economic development. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Aaron Farmer. Aaron Farmer is the president of Retail Coach, a national retail consulting, market research, and development firm that delivers high-impact retail recruitment strategies to local governments, chambers of commerce, and economic development organizations. Prior to joining the Retail Coach, Aaron provided marketing research and retail development services for leading U.S. retailers and restaurants such as FedEx, Kinko's, Adidas, and the National American Association of Subway Franchises. He holds a degree in marketing from the Mays Business School at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, and an MBA from Texas A&M University Commerce. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Jennings, appreciate the introduction and just appreciate the opportunity to really be here today. Really just excited about this partnership. Sandy, appreciate you doing the introductions for everybody as well, but and also North Carolina Economic Development Association. I'll tell you, we're excited about this opportunity to talk to you about retail. Retail is something that it is an economic development tool, but it's something that many of us are focused on right now with COVID-19, impacting all of us. It's really interesting to see what's happening. What's retail going to look like as we get further into 2021 and beyond. So I'm excited to really be here presenting this. I'm going to be presenting alongside Charles Parker and Jennings. If you want to continue with Charles's introduction, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Aaron. I've known Charles a little bit longer than Aaron, and Charles and I have done the trade show circuit for a while now, and so we've always managed to catch up either in the Starbucks line or in the registration line at various ICSC events across the United States. So Charles, for those who don't know, is project director at Retail Coach, where he oversees the retail recruitment process and leads promotional economic development efforts for client communities. His work has led to the location of brands like Marshalls, Five Below, Planet Fitness, Popeyes, and Publix. Charles earned both MBA and Masters of Science degrees from Mississippi State University, where he led research teams studying economic impacts on rural communities. He's an active member of ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centers, and Main Street America. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Jennings, and for the introduction, for having Aaron and me on this morning. Like you said, I kind of cover the Southeast for our firm. Specifically North Carolina is one of those where we're active in several markets right now. And we're really excited to talk about what we're seeing in the retail sides of things, how it ultimately plays into overall economic development trends and economic development as a whole, and how you can use retail as a tool to maybe go after some of those more, the big buffalo items and the mega sites that we know that North Carolina has several of and is always competitive in going after traditional economic development pieces. Aaron and I are going to tag team kind of going through this, and Jennings, feel free to jump in and kind of be the voice of God over us if you want to drop in and say anything as we kind of go through some of these pieces. But we're really excited to talk about a lot of these things today. Real quickly, I'll let Aaron kind of expand a little bit more about maybe the history of our firm, kind of where we came from and kind of what we do in terms of working with communities.
Absolutely. Thanks, Charles. The Retail Coach, we've been doing this for quite some time. Started back in 2000, so really the longest tenured retail recruitment firm. But as Charles mentioned, we work all over the U.S., but a big focus for us is in the Southeast. So a lot of time spent in North Carolina and the surrounding area. But what we do is we work with municipalities and economic development organizations to, number one, understand what your retail opportunity is, and then number two, go out and recruit that retail. Also a big part of what we do is work with downtown businesses, work with local businesses to really understand what that retail opportunity is. But again, excited to be here, and we're going to jump into this, and I'm going to switch over to Charles. We're going to talk to you about retail as an economic development tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aaron, I know in the conversations you and I have quite a bit, talking with areas and those folks that are in charge of economic development, we get, where does retail fit, or we don't worry about retail, we're on the higher scheme of things. So we wanted to kind of start our conversation today with where retail fits in as a strategy, how it helps you reach your overall goals. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the impacts retail can have and some current trends in the overall retail market, some as recent as this week with a few of the brands that we've seen headlines on in even the last few days. And then lastly, kind of wrap it up talking about, hey, how is the approach to retail development a little bit different than industrial recruitment or corporate development recruitment, and kind of have a whole over-encompassing aspect. Hopefully not take up too much of your time this morning, leave some time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to type those in. I know Jennings is going to help moderate some of that towards the back half of this. But really want to jump in with Aaron. And, we understand that, traditional economic development has really been a focus on that industry and corporate recruitment, attracting manufacturing, hey, we want to be, the home of corporate headquarters, a focus on workforce education and development, working with community colleges and universities nearby, focus on industrial parks and mega sites. If you ask, most folks about economic development, those are going to be the first things people talk about because it's really the tried and true method of developing an area. You recruit the big names, the jobs. That's going to, attract the workforce. You're going to have a bigger and stronger local workforce. That in turn, it's going to increase your demand for residential development. You're going to get the housing and the rooftops to pop up. And then, the old adage that retail follows rooftop, retail takes care of itself. I mean, this is a formula that's for decades old, has been going on, and it's tried and true. But Aaron, and I'm going to let you kind of talk through some of this as well. That's not necessarily retail as the end all be all, the residual factors of it. We're seeing more and more, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, it's coming out of the 2008, that retail development has actually kind of been an input for some of these pieces. It can actually set some areas apart when they're going after those. So I know you've worked with a lot of communities that have kind of taken this approach to, hey, maybe let's turn into the retail trend and use it as a tool.
Yeah, I think more and more we're seeing municipalities and economic development organizations really realize that retail has to be part of your overall economic development strategy. I'll tell a quick story, but I was just about 2 weeks ago. I was with a big site selector. One of our clients in Texas actually asked us to come with them to meet with about a 3,000 employee job maker that was in town. So a large company that was looking to bring 3,000 people there. And the reason they had us, the retail coach, there is they wanted us to talk about retail as quality of life. This company was looking at moving in, about half of their employees would be moving into the area or driving in to the area. So they wanted to make sure that the kids of these employers, that the employers, the husbands, the wives that are moving in as well, that quality of life aspect was there. So retail is absolutely economic development. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I remember, back in the 2000s, I guess, early 2000s, it was, is focused on primary jobs, primary jobs. That's economic development. But more and more, we're seeing that these municipalities and these economic development organizations realize retail has to be a component of that and plays towards getting those larger primary jobs, larger employers coming to the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that retail as an amenity is an important aspect because you're getting these brands, Facebook is dropping, mega data centers across the country, and they're looking for those secondary type markets, those communities outside of, the Dallases, the Nashvilles. So I think we're kind of in the middle of a renaissance of those secondary and tertiary communities because of the quality of life. We're working with a lot of economic developers that are heavy into the industrial and corporate recruitment, and they're asking us, hey, can we put together a summary for the retail and the entertainment aspect? Because we're getting questions about, hey, if we locate there, what are my employees going to do? Are they going to be happy living in your community? Can we recruit more because it's a good area to live? And I think, one of the ripple effects of the pandemic is people are working more from home. They're not going to be tied as much to these downtown aspects. They're going to have more choice on where to live, and they're going to want to live where there's shopping, where there's entertainment, where they can raise a family and have those outings in the evening and the weekends. And like I say, it kind of goes from that linear effect to the more circular model where, hey, maybe retail is having an effect on, hey, it's a cherry on top to separate your community versus a mega site in another state. Looking after, going after the ones in North Virginia versus, Virginia and the kind of mid-Atlantic region. But at the same time, people are wanting to live closer to, town centers and mixed use developments, that it kind of has the cascading effect in the opposite direction, that, retail, yes, comes last and it follows rooftops, but the other way around, it also can create demand that people want to go and live by those retail nodes.
Charles, I think we've seen a shift here, maybe the last 10 to 15 years, that, people would find a job and then go live there. But now what's happening is people are figuring out where they want to live. They're looking for that quality of life, and then they're finding a job. So it's almost reversed, and really accelerated in the last, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, my dad got 2 offers for Chicago and New Orleans when he graduated college, and he had to choose where to go. But if you're perusing LinkedIn now, go and look at MBA programs and graduate lists, the open for work. The first line on their LinkedIn is saying, hey, open for relocation. And they'll name 2 or 3 cities that, hey, those are the only 2 or 3 cities they're going to look at. They're going to go and move to those cities and then find a job. So it kind of has reversed, and they're going to those cities because of the retail development. So it certainly has become, the apex in some regards, especially for those younger generation. But even in the sense of standalone retail and understanding it, hey, still maybe not a focus for us, it'll pop in. Retail and mixed use is really how just about all commercial development is going these days. And any major type of development, odds are it's going to have at least a piece of retail as part of it. That's going to make the overall project work. Whether that's an office park, they're going to want to have somewhere they can go and walk to get lunch. Whether that's a housing opportunity, a lot of them are doing ground floor retail in a lot of the markets. That, even if it's not going to be a main focus for you, understanding, the trends in retail, understanding how to speak their language, looking more at the macro from the micro. So you're not looking at 6 or 8 county region, not looking at your labor shed from a 60-minute drive time. We're looking more at 1, 3, 5 miles, 10 minutes, looking at cell phone data. So it definitely is a piece of how it's moving forward, because retail, medical, hotel, office, it's all merging together. You can't just be a one-trick pony.
And Charles, when it comes to mixed use developments like this, they all kind of play together. You really need each of them to make the deal work. There's certain medical or office users that'll pay higher rents than maybe retail or vice versa. So to make the economics of these mixed use projects work, you really need a mixture of what's up there: retail, residential, office, hotel, and medical, at least some part of that mixture in there to make the numbers work.
Yeah, and it's a diversification of risk we're seeing on the development side. I mean, I think the pandemic has kind of unlayered and shown how much and important it is to kind of be diversified. That, how many corporate offices were working from home. You weren't getting that foot traffic, but maybe they had some takeout for the restaurant adjacent to make that property sustainable throughout the time, or vice versa, or it was a medical component. So it really is kind of a merging together out of necessity, because that's what's ultimately going to be most successful. But even talking about retail as a tool, one of the things that you talk about retail, we're only filling 1,500 square feet for a Starbucks kiosk on an end cap, or we're bringing in a Target or Whole Foods, but that's not the same as a $2 billion investment for 44 acres in an industrial park. But it can still have a major impact on your local community. And this is some of the numbers that we highlight. But Aaron, I know, we've worked with a lot of these brands and have landed a lot of these brands in communities. The trickle down effects of these, at the bottom line are still very significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the local tax impact you have on here for some of these larger retailers, but even some of the smaller retailers. I mean, they're bringing jobs to the community, and most of these retailers are paying a lot more than they did, say, 5 or 10 years ago. So they're somewhat higher paying job coming in. And then again, you're seeing that local tax implication there. But, I think back to, I'll tell another story. I was, this is probably, 15 years ago maybe, but I was attending an economic development council meeting in another state. And there was a lady, there were a couple of people that stood up in the presentation and said, look, retail is not economic development. We have to focus on primary jobs. That's our main focus. And this lady that I had become friends with, and unfortunately she's passed on now, she stood up and she said, well, hold on a second. I'm a town of 1,500 people. We just landed a Sonic. Please don't tell me that's not economic development, because to our community, Sonic, that is economic development, and we're excited about it. So, whether you're looking at the Starbucks of the world, the McDonald's of the world, or even some of the bigger players, McDonald's, Publix, Target, whoever it might be, they are bringing tax revenue, jobs to the community. And then many times they'll bring other retailers. Retailers and restaurants like to cluster. So if one retailer sees Target going into a community, that's going to put you on the radar. If they see Chick-fil-A going into the community, that's going to put you on the radar. So like it says on here, retail can keep you in the game until you get that home run economic development project.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. That's everything is money related, but that's not money related. The fact that bringing a brand to a community, especially a smaller community, it gives them a sense of we made it. For smaller communities, getting a Sonic is a big deal because hey, now we're a Sonic community. We're on the map, and I don't care what anyone says. If you're on a road trip, you'll skip a few exits to go to a Chick-fil-A because there's one coming up in 8 miles. And because you get some of these, top banner brands like that, people know what cities are, what communities are, because, that's where that Chick-fil-A is, or, that's where the Target is. We know what exit that is on 95 because that's where we stop because we don't miss that Chick-fil-A on a road trip. And kind of in that same vein, one of the ones that's in the news now, in North Carolina is Buc-ee's. And you and me both being Texas boys, understand the impact Buc-ee's can have. And obviously projects this size, there are pros and cons of it. But the fact that, you and I spent a lot of time driving the roads of Texas, and Buc-ee's has billboards for 60, 80 miles ahead of time saying, hey, hold it if you can. Our bathrooms are cleaner and up ahead in 65 miles. And a lot of people do because it creates that place that they want to go see it. It's for those that don't know Buc-ee's, it's kind of like a Cracker Barrel meets a Sheetz meets a Wawa on steroids. It's Six Flags over gas stations, and it's not a truck stop. Truck stops can't get in there. But we work down in Loxley, Alabama, where Buc-ee's put their first location outside the state of Texas. Loxley's a town of 2,300 folks, and it's really not even off. Most of the city is off the interstate there. 5-10 years ago, nobody knew what Loxley was, where it was, that he was in Alabama. But now, you talk about Loxley, Alabama, people from all the Southeast know, that's where the Buc-ee's is. It's right there between Mobile and Pensacola. It's put them on the map in a different sense, not just the impacts of $30 million in sales tax revenue coming to the town, but also, hey, we know where Loxley is. That's on the way to the beach. That's right where that is. So it can have kind of that extra layer of, hey, look, we made it type piece.
And we've had the opportunity to help locate 3 of these Buc-ee's locations. Charles mentioned one, but 2 others. But they're slowly making their way. They started in Texas. They landed in Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and then there's 1 or 2 possibly planned for North Carolina in the near future. And I'll just tell you a quick story, quick thought. But I have 3 kids. I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 6-month-old. And I will tell you, they do a great job of marketing and getting people to stop in the communities where they are. I will tell you, I've never been able to drive by a Buc-ee's with my kids in the car without stopping. So, even when I have a full tank of gas, it's an experience when you go in there. So we're going to talk about experiential retail and those sort of things, but this is one that's doing it right.
And the impacts that something like this, a major destination retailer can have on an area is nothing new. Looking at Mebane with the Tanger outlets there, exit 154. This kind of just has a quick kind of case study looking at it. Go back to 2006, we had a golf course and these housing developments that really never got off the ground. You kind of see the progression there that, Tanger outlets come in 2010. That little small circle there in the middle is a Chick-fil-A. And then ultimately you see the build out of those residential components, all around. Not to say that Tanger necessarily caused those to come, but whenever you do come in and bring a destination retailer like that, the notoriety, the foot traffic aspect, at worst, it advanced some of those things. It put Mebane on the map in terms of, hey, that's where the outlet mall is. That's a good place to be. It got momentum going. And as Aaron, you alluded to, kind of getting one can really start the momentum in the right direction. That it's usually not just one announcement in the retail world that you get. It's one, and then it's 2, 3, 4. They trigger one another. It's a dominoes effect that all of a sudden you've got 4 or 5 announcements, and all of a sudden, hey, exit 154, that's the place to stop because they've got Chick-fil-A, they got the outlet mall, they've got those pieces, and that ultimately drives to, hey, this is where housing development wants to ultimately drop because they know things are happening there. And if your ultimate goal for economic development is to go after the larger corporate aspect of it, hey, we've got new houses coming up, we've got a growing workforce, this is why you need to be here. So it does ultimately grow that snowball into, hey, yes, a start at retail, but we're ultimately getting to our goals of traditional economic development. And looking at really more closer at the housing side of things, dropping in some of these residential components, whether it's a Tanger outlet or a grocery store or IKEA, they kind of help can move your housing development and the goals and kind of have some extra feathers in your cap when talking about your area. IKEA increases properties value almost 4.5%. The home appreciation for areas that get a Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, and Aldi jump, over 30% within 5 years. So if you're looking to attract more people, more population, that you can in turn tout for workforce, for better education, for increased sales tax, that overall kind of take your community development goals that we're talking about in a few minutes. These types of things can play a really important stepping stone to advancing your community and kind of showing growth and kind of being those kind of mini case studies on your way to say, hey, this is why you need to be in our area versus somewhere else. And then kind of really switching over to retail trends, kind of the elephant in the room with the pandemic going on in retail. And I know we kind of alluded to it in the opening about how it's impacted the area, but we keep a close look, especially this year, on foot traffic changes, because it's been such an important piece of, hey, where are people shopping? What are they doing? What are the hot spots that ultimately economic development are going to spring forward when we kind of get the all clear and in the interim? And Aaron, I know we look at this a lot in terms of what's the national average versus where we're located at, but foot traffic is a really big indication that we've seen over the past year of how folks are making decisions. And looking at the overall aspect here, we see that the national average overall foot traffic was down about 14%. That being said, there were some hot spots in the economy, especially on the retail side. Home improvement was obviously one at almost 20% improved. But we like to look closer at the state, look at a more micro level. And North Carolina has really outperformed the national average in terms of foot traffic. It's kind of been in the middle of the road, it seems like, in terms of restrictions and stay at home. It's probably behind Texas and Georgia and Florida on a few of those, but kind of, ahead of California on some of the openings. So it's kind of right in the middle of the spectrum. But it's outperformed. We've seen a growth in grocery foot traffic. We've seen, a growth in home improvements. Shop and service is down, but it's not nearly as down to the national average. So these are things that we're talking about certain markets, especially our North Carolina clients and that area as a whole. When we can compare it against the national average, compare it against other states, because when we talk to site selectors, a big thing that it comes down to, they're dropping 6-8 stores maybe a year, but they're evaluating about at least 20-25 markets that all on paper meet their minimum criteria. We'll talk about site selection, but whatever we can do beyond that to show, hey, maybe you need to be in this North Carolina community instead of, in that Tennessee community. These are the types of things, the talking points that can ultimately kind of push a site selection and say, hey, maybe we need to prioritize this side in Henderson over elsewhere. So these are the type of things that ultimately go into it.
Charles, something to point out on that slide. You mentioned grocery is up, just a little over 1%. Home improvements up an astounding 21%. Both of those categories were not opening a lot of stores pre-COVID. But they've done so well during the pandemic. They are planning to open stores in North Carolina pretty rapidly as we, start to come out of the pandemic. So that's something to point out, is that we've seen some categories that were struggling going into this that are now maybe going to lead the pack as far as new openings go. But specifically, groceries and home improvement are two to really look at there.
Yeah, and it's been a mixed bag, kind of across retail, as we all know. Some have really struggled, and other ones, have flourished. I know we talked a little bit about Belk this week, kind of among our group, and planning this in the news this week on the Chapter 11. But I know, Aaron, we work closely with Belk. I know you've worked with several of theirs in the past and have kind of been in talks with them and some ones across the country right now of kind of what the next step for Belk kind of looks like.
Yeah, Belk, especially because of its, just its history with North Carolina and its that being its home base. I worried when I saw that come out this week about about the bankruptcy, but we're working on a couple of deals with Belk right now. And I called our contact there and I said, okay, what does this mean? Is this deal that we're working on, is it over? And as of right now, the plan is to not have any layoffs and not close any stores. So that could change, obviously, over the next few months as they work through this. But they're really going to try to shed some debt that they have through this bankruptcy, and they are going to actually start utilizing their parking lots. So they're going to start carving out pad sites for maybe a restaurant or two or strip centers in front of their stores there. So I would not be too worried about Belk, at least for the foreseeable future, as they've told us there will be no layoffs or closing stores, at least right now.
And that's kind of the other side of the coin throughout the pandemic and even kind of leading up to it, when we talk about, retail Armageddon and the end of retail and e-commerce and everything else that's crushing retail. Yeah, we've seen a peak in store closures and all that, but at the same time, all that does is create opportunity for different new and emerging brands. One that in particular to North Carolina that we touch base with a lot is Panda Express in terms of out parcels, and their strategy for new store development has always been to purchase their properties. So in terms of Belk, now that maybe they're willing to look at carving out and selling off properties, makes sense. But overall, Panda Express had honestly been a little bit soft on the North Carolina market prior to the pandemic. They were looking really just the top 1% of deals. It's basically the can't miss sites, but we've actually seen them soften over the last 10 months and request more information on more sites, because they see this as an opportunity that, hey, if some of these brands aren't going to make it or are going to, trim the fat in terms of the real estate, they want to be aggressive and say, hey, we can go get some really good out parcels that weren't available before, and kind of gone into growth mode. Sonic, that we mentioned earlier, has gone into growth mode. They had one of the best years to date during all this and have thrived as our consumer preferences have changed. And kind of along that line and things that, the other side of the coin, this is a map of the foot traffic of Gaston Mall in Gastonia. We've been working in Gastonia for a little over a year now. But, you would think that, through the pandemic, through what we know about traditional retail, especially in closed malls, that, hey, this property's got to be tanking, right? And we see it right about late March when the shutdown happened, the mall shut down and foot traffic dipped. But over the last 10 months or so, it's stabilized. And then in the last quarter, so basically November, or last 2 months of the year, November and December, we see this spike. And these top bars here are year-over-year changes. So what this is showing is the last 8 weeks of 2020, Gaston Mall outperformed itself over 2019. So it had more foot traffic. It was busier than the year before. So I think just a really interesting takeaway is that, hey, in the worst of times in terms of COVID, that, people aren't, necessarily feel safe going out and are, we're reduced our foot traffic overall, either by choice or by some stay-at-home orders. In addition to e-commerce and the rise of e-commerce and, the ever, decline of malls that everyone talks about, we got a really good mall here that's improving their foot traffic. And I think that's just an important note to say, hey, maybe it's not all doom and gloom, that, hey, there is still going to be a place for brick and mortar retail to take off.
Charles, you mentioned that last quarter of 2020, and that's pretty consistent with what we're seeing or what we saw from holiday sales. Holiday sales were up about 8.2, 8.3% over 2019. So we're expecting that strong kind of last quarter to carry over as we get into 2021. We're already in it, but as we continue through 2021.
Yeah, and oddly enough, it feels weird to be saying this in 2021, but through the pandemic, the big boxes are still on top. And you probably laugh at us if we said that 3 years ago. But because they've been deemed essential, and because they're kind of one-stop shop for a lot of these pieces that, hey, we don't have to go to 3 or 4 different stores while we're out during the pandemic. We can go in, get everything we need. And in the case of those that are cooped up at home and, want to improve their home, tired of looking at that blank wall, or, hate that their backyard doesn't have a cool patio to sit on in the evenings, they're doing the, do-it-yourself projects. We've seen these brands, stay strong and be the top dog in this sense. And that, in itself has created some challenges along with e-commerce. Aaron, I know we look at, some of the job flow aspect and how these brands are competing. But looking at, USPS, FedEx, UPS, they've kind of come front and center to some of this piece.
Yeah. We really saw the e-commerce, e-commerce sales, they were accelerated because of, obviously because of COVID-19. But what that's also done from an economic development standpoint is it's caused UPS, USPS, FedEx to hire more people. Amazon, same thing. Amazon's delivering their own packages in many cases now. So Amazon hired about 350,000. UPS hired about 100,000 during the holidays, and we're expecting these hiring trends to continue.
Yeah, and I think kind of on the Amazon and delivery piece of it, one thing I think is kind of an interesting slide to look at is, how is Walmart kind of played into the role? And this is a graph that shows, app downloads between Amazon and Walmart. And forever, Amazon has kicked Walmart's tail in this department, because they are the online e-commerce giant. But during the pandemic back in April, we saw Walmart surpass Amazon for the first time in app downloads to this. And I think this is really important because really the only thing that Walmart has over Amazon is physical locations. They've got an established distribution network through retail stores. So I think them having that presence kind of showed the value that it's going to have moving forward. Amazon's biggest challenge is always going to be that last mile until they get that distribution network set up. So for those brands that do have physical locations, they're going to have that advantage because they can ultimately have those touch points to their consumer closest to them.
Bottom line, brick and mortar retail, it might be changing, but it's going to stick with us forever.
Yeah. And then the other aspects we talk about the pandemic is how people are purchasing things. We've got the Zoom attire that, business up front, up top, and casual, Delaware sweatpants, pajamas on webinars and pieces. And it's trickled all the way up to what they're producing, to even, Walmart recognizing that sales of tops and, and upper half clothing was well beyond bottoms, as people, hey, we just stay in our pajamas all day on the bottom half. So it's funny how, our changes in consumer behavior, or even how we work, ripples through the economy in terms of back to retail of, hey, maybe from an operation standpoint, Walmart is changing, what they have there in their store, that it's more tops and less bottoms.
And expect to see that carry over into sales during the springtime. And as we, get into 2021, we're already seeing it with the Walmarts, the Targets, the clothing stores of the world. You're starting to see some major discounts on the bottoms, but not the tops. So, it has to do with supply and demand.
Right. It's funny because, we saw this graphic in the middle of the pandemic that in a matter of 90 days, back from really April, May, June, we vaulted forward as a society 10 years in consumer and business digital adoption. That's mind blowing. And the fact that, hey, we were up against the wall, we got to figure out a way to move forward. And so we did, which is really cool to think about as a society moving forward. But hey, so much more folks are shopping online, even the ones that maybe dabble in it. Now they're buying, their toothpaste, their, toilet paper online, stuff that said, oh, why would I ever get that delivered? Now they're getting delivered. Food delivery apps jumped $3 billion and more than doubled last year. From DoorDash, Uber Eats, and the likes, because people didn't even go to get takeout food. And then I think one's kind of funny is the QR codes, because QR codes have been around forever. I mean, I remember back 15, 20 years ago, they first came out, and they were how you looked at movie posters at the movie theater to watch the trailer for new movies coming out. So they're not new, but we just finally decided to fully adopt them. If you go to a restaurant in most major cities that, hey, they've done away with menus completely. Hey, scan it, and our menu's all online. So these are the type of things that retailers are having to think about. Hey, how are we going to incorporate these new behaviors, these new trends and our overall store departments? And I know, Aaron, like you said, brick and mortar is not going away, especially in the food category. And we're seeing a lot of those things be shown in terms of the new prototypes we're seeing for some of the major brands.
Absolutely. You can see some of the pictures on here, but expect to see some changes coming to the designs of these new restaurants and really retailers too. Restaurants, you can kind of see a lot of the focus on drive-through. Even with some of the more casual or quick casual restaurants, the Chipotles of the world, the Shake Shacks, we're expecting them to demand drive-throughs. Expect to see more patio seating. Expect to see more walk-up windows. Those are just some of the things that you're going to see going forward here. But here are 4 good examples of what that's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things to call out is you have a designated line for app delivery pickups and services like Grubhub and DoorDash.
Yep.
But from an economic developer standpoint, I think this is interesting because this is a major shift for some of these brands in terms of what their sites look like. They're all look for the good hard corner at signalized intersections, on the going home or on the coming to side of things. But, maybe if we're diminishing our dining rooms, do we have to have, the same rules and regulations for a number of parking spots per 1,000 feet? How are we going to make sure that we're marketing sites with good access points? If they're trying to fit 5 cars at once through a drive-through, do they need multiple access points? So as an economic developer, I think having some forethought of, hey, what are we doing from our coding, from our overlay districts, things like that are ultimately going to play. And if you've got those squared away, you can, market that, hey, we've thought about this. If you want to have 5 drive-throughs, this is a really good site for it. We've already got some curb cuts approved from DOT. We're doing our front end work. That's going to make you so much more competitive when these start dropping additional locations over some of your competing communities.
2 more quick takeaways from what you were just talking about there. You're likely going to have to look at your parking requirements or your parking code in your community. And then as this relates to downtown areas, you're probably not going to see a lot of drive-throughs in downtown areas, but expect to see more walk-up windows and, maybe designated curbside spaces in downtown areas.
Exactly. And then kind of the last trend I want to talk about is obviously the work from home capacity. We're seeing estimates that as high as 25 to 30% of the workforce will be working from home multiple days. And I think this kind of goes back to the mid and tertiary markets that if you're a traditional bedroom community that you lose your population, pre-COVID, to the big city to go in and work into other areas, your population is essentially going to grow 30% because those people aren't leaving every day. And I think it's going to be a really interesting redistribution of how retailers look at daytime population, how they evaluate markets. Because if they know that those people aren't going to be leaving every day, they're going to be staying at home. They're going to need somewhere to eat lunch. They're going to need somewhere to grab dinner if they're not, eating it by their office before they come home. And it can completely change, I think, some of the site selection criteria, which is a really interesting aspect of this. I know from some of the cell phone tracking that we're doing, Starbucks and Dunkin', for example, forever their peak hours were between 7 and 9 a.m. People basically pick up a cup of coffee on the way to work. During the pandemic, their peak hours changed from 11 to 1 midday. People were getting out of the house to go pick up a cup of coffee. So, as these things all change, it's completely going to change how we sell our communities, talk about our communities and the opportunity on our communities because people aren't moving the same way. And it's kind of comes back to the community development. If people get to choose where they want to live, why are they going to choose your community? It's not just necessarily going to be driven by jobs anymore. It's going to be driven by amenities. We're seeing, public space be a huge quality of life issue. That's where people are moving because, hey, if I'm working from home, I can walk down to the park and get a lap in around the pond on my lunch hour, not have to go anywhere and still feel safe. So I think it's really interesting to think about that in terms of, hey, are we making sure community development is at the forefront? And then again, like I said, we work with a lot of communities just outside metropolitan areas, whether it's Dallas, Nashville, Charlotte, Raleigh. We're talking to these folks and on their downtown side of things, we've seen them actually have really good years in a sense that they're getting higher foot traffic. And I think a lot of that is people aren't feeling as comfortable in the last year, going on their traditional vacations or doing things. So they're looking for those opportunities to get out of the house, and it's all day trips. So if you have a cool downtown area, your demand for that type of destination just went through the roof because it's really the only opportunity in town for those areas. So I think we're about to see a renaissance for secondary and tertiary markets, but it's still going to be, hey, we have to focus on the amenity side. I know we're at 10:45 right now, so we got just a few more slides to talk about. I wanted to wrap this up, Aaron, talking about, hey, some of the mechanics of attracting retail development. All right, maybe we've convinced you a little bit in the last 40 minutes that, retail is important. Maybe you should at least pay attention to it. What's the first step? What do I do next? And these are kind of our main tenets, to retail development that we've kind of been our guiding light over the last 21 years. Going through it, I talked a little bit the last few slides about community development and how it must precede economic development. And what that means is sometimes taking a look at your community and driving through it and saying, hey, is this somewhere that I'd like to live, that I'd like to invest? Sometimes investing in that park can ultimately have the ripple effects to help you recruit more retail and, scale back up to the traditional economic development piece. But also, they must have a good mix of independent, Aaron, you talked about downtowns all the way up to the national brands. And there must be a fit. These are things that we talk about, that it must make sense to be in a community, and they must be recruited. Why do we talk about, hey, why do we have to reach out and talk to them? I thought retail followed rooftops. What's the value of being, going out and trying to be proactive and recruited? Can we really make an impact, I guess, is the question that we get a lot, right?
Yeah, I think you're right with all of this, but these are all, like you said, kind of our pillars to success, or what you need to build a strong retail community. But at the end of the day, like you said, retail, they have to be recruited. You can't just expect or hope. Hope is not a strategy, right? You can't just hope that a retailer or restaurant's going to come in. So it is a process, not an event, something that you really have to work at.
Yeah, because these brands, they have there's the set criteria. You can look it up. You can figure out whether or not you are a fit or you're not a fit, or you've got a good site that would be part of their strategy. But at the same time, you're one of 50 communities that's going to fit, and they're not going to drop a store in all 50 communities. So how do you separate yourself out? How do you make sure that you kind of say, what's the cherry on top to pick my community over their community? And that's where I think traditional economic development has separated itself from what we do on the retail side of things. So it's not the same for recruiting towards a mega site like the Greensboro Randolph mega site, where you're talking about how many ports are nearby, how far away you are from the interstate in terms of transit or rail lines or air or low cost for electric rates. We're talking more about on the micro scale. So in Gastonia, we look at submarkets all the time, and hey, we know that within 3 miles, you've got twice the employees or 3 times the employees that you do on the south side of town. So it gets very much more to the micro level to say, hey, not only are you looking at our overall trade area, but you're looking at this specific site. And like I said, ultimately that can be a Costco or a Home Depot that can still have tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars impact on your bottom line. And how we look at it is through the trade area, the retail trade area. And traditionally it's been 5 miles, 10 minutes, 3 miles, how we evaluate those sites. But it's become so much more than that. And Aaron, we use cell phone analysis that we wanted to introduce today, the idea of really taking an additional way to evaluate your community.
More than ever, retailers and restaurants, developers, if they're going to locate in your community, they have to know that without a doubt, they're going to be successful. So if they open a store there, it's going to be a successful store. So they're looking for more than just computer models. They're looking for this cell phone data that Charles is going to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, and so just a quick example, we looked at the Henderson Walmart. They're right there on I-40, and what this shows us is, even though they're a community of under 20,000, in the last 12 months, that Walmart, and it's the geofence, just the building, so not the parking lot, not next door, that Walmart had over 184,000 unique individuals shop in it. So for a community of 17,000 to get 180 unique individuals kind of shows how far of a pull that Walmart has. It had 1.6 million visits. And what we ultimately do with it is map out where they're coming from in Henderson. And we can say that, hey, even though that we traditionally look at, 10 minutes or 5 miles, we can see that people are coming at a regular basis, this is multiple visits to that Walmart in the last 12 months, that it's really not, doing due diligence on that community. If you're just talking about that 5 mile or that city population, you're not telling the whole story. So you might meet that minimum for the 5 miles to get a new store, but the cherry on top is, hey, beyond that 5 miles, we've got a pool of 45,000 people that also shop there, and we've got the cell phone data to prove it. And I think these are really important tools that we've used in the last 5-10 years. It's become more prevalent that, looking and proving that people are coming from, all the way up to Kerr Lake. Walmart's the only show in town for these folks up here. They have to come down here. And a lot of models that are based on 5 miles won't always take that into account. So it won't necessarily introduce you to a new market, but it can be that cherry on top to get you a new store over one, 30, 40 miles away, to make sure that, hey, we can get prioritized over a different community. Because if you're just looking at the city population, the 5 mile, 10 mile population, you're leaving at least 25,000 people on the table in terms of marketing your community. And I know with the communities that we work with, Aaron, the first thing we say is, hey, what's your city population? All right, that's great. Forget it. Never use that number again, because that's not how you sell the opportunity in town. City limits are very arbitrarily drawn. County limits are arbitrarily drawn. People don't necessarily live in one side or the other for a reason. Retailers don't care either what their address says. They care if they can get the people to shop in their store. So that's why we talk about, hey, this is your true draw of the area.
So this might be these last few slides we've been through might be the most important of the entire presentation. Number one, know your retail trade area. That's probably if there's any takeaway you take from this presentation, you have to have an accurate trade area, know your trade area so that you can go out and recruit restaurants and retail. And also the trade area is going to help your existing businesses. It's going to help your existing businesses know where to market, where their consumers are coming from so that they can build their marketing strategy around that.
Exactly. And the cell phone data is really interesting. There's so many uses to this. I know for a few of my clients that we've gone and looked at, corporate areas they were looking to recruit, to map out their existing labor shed, to say, hey, so much of our area is already leaving down there. So we've even done some corporate recruitment work with this as kind of some extra stuff. So much of cell phone data is a critical part to just about every part of economic development. But then really wrapping it all up, all the data that you have, it's kind of worthless if you're not marketing it, if you're not getting out there in areas that people see. And Aaron, I know we put together a bunch of pieces for our client communities to make sure we're that marketing partner to put it in forms that site selectors are looking for, building summaries, whether that's, one-page flyers for City of Gastonia, or building out website dashboards for site selectors to peruse and check out basically everything they need to know about a market area, even down to the specifics of specific sites, whether that's, 32,000 square feet of vacant space or a new downtown development project like the Fuse District in Gastonia.
Yeah.
You have to make sure you're marketing it and getting the word out and getting it to the right folks.
Once you have, once you've gotten this marketing materials, once you've got the trade area numbers over to these retailers and restaurants, they're likely going to say, okay, we like the community, but what sites are available? So you need to make sure as economic developers that you have these sites available. So if Chick-fil-A is looking for a 2-acre site in your community, that same day you talk to Chick-fil-A, or the next day, just as soon as you can, you want to get those 3 to 5 2-acre sites that fit their criteria. It'll help speed up the process, but especially help you as you're competing with other communities for Chick-fil-A's or other retailers and restaurants.
Yeah, and as our founder always said, time kills deals. So the faster you have this stuff turned around, the better. And then also that kind of signals that, hey, this is a business friendly area. They get it. I can work with these guys, which is, again, another feather in the cap and makes you stand out. Lastly, just to drive the point home, just a short list of some of the folks that have talked about expanding stores in 2021, just to kind of show that, hey, brick and mortar is not going away. Physical stores are still expanding. There's a lot of stores that are looking to drop new locations this year that are still being aggressive. Looks like we kept it under an hour there.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions come across, and we're going to hand it back over to Jennings here in just a second. But there were a couple of questions whether or not this presentation and the recording will be available, and you'll see maybe tomorrow, but that will be sent out to everyone that attended.
Great job, Charles and Aaron. fantastic presentation. And I've made a lot of notes here and learned a lot from me. So I really, really appreciate that. And in the interest of time, we'll go straight to some questions. If anyone has a question, please type that into your Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. And we have quite a few. One question that came up during the presentation is that, traditional industrial recruitment, and you guys touched on this a little bit, an important element of that is competition. And when we think about retail projects, we really don't think about competition in there. Can you just touch base on that? And does site competition exist in retail? And people understand, I think, a misconception of the time it takes to put a retail project together. Almost as much or maybe even longer than an industrial project. So I'll let you guys talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so just like traditional, economic development, industry recruitment, manufacturing recruitment, whatever it might be, primary job recruitment, you are competing when it comes to retail. You're competing with other communities. Typically, and Charles, I think, mentioned this, but typically the way it works, and we'll just we've been using them as examples throughout this time, so we'll use them as an example, but Chick-fil-A will announce maybe at the beginning of the year that they're going to open 10 or 15 locations in a state. Well, there's a lot more than 10 or 15 opportunities for Chick-fil-A. So you're competing on a regular basis with, again, not just those communities around you, directly around you, but you're competing throughout the state and really into other states as well, because there's only so many Chick-fil-A's, there's only so many Targets, there's only so many Publix to go around. So absolutely. And that's kind of why you have to be aggressive when it comes to recruitment. But, as it relates to, kind of getting out there and how long the process takes, retail recruitment, you might get lucky and you might land a retailer that moves into, an existing space you have, and that takes 4 or 6 months. But the typical, from start to finish retail recruitment process with the prospect, usually in that 12 to 18 month range is typically from first contact. So when they're open is 12 to 18 months.
Right. A little bit more on the competition aspect. It's kind of the opposite in terms of kind of the teamwork aspect, because a lot of the larger retailers aren't going to go into both communities that are adjacent to one another, that are right butt up to one another. So it's really going to be one or the other. So you're almost pitting yourself against your neighbor. And Walmart is infamous for kind of splitting the market and kind of creating a new retail node between the two, because they know that whether they select one community or the other, they're going to serve both communities. Just from a drive time and radial perspective, that there's a lot of cross shopping there. So in some sense, it's even more competitive and more cutthroat with your neighbor, because you're not joining up to get them to come to a mega site that you're both going to serve. It's kind of the reverse. You're getting one retailer that's going to serve both communities, and only one of those communities is going to get the benefits of it. So I would say in almost some senses, it's more competitive.
Too, you can almost look at it, with retail competition, it's an internal. It's internal to the company, whereas industrial is external. They'll announce, hey, they'll pit states against states, cities against cities. Where retail doesn't do that. You may never know you're even in the running for a Chick-fil-A or Wendy's or whatever it is, retailer in your community.
Exactly. Amazon will announce it 2 years out for a new headquarters, and Cookout will deny till the day they open up and start sending out burgers that's coming. So
that's right.
That's right. Fact too.
All right, we'll move on to another question. And this is really more of a myth versus fact on retail jobs versus industrial jobs. Just a couple of comments, and you guys feel free to chime in there. Retail jobs sometimes get a bad rap there because of low wage and not living wage and no benefits, and that's changed. The trend now is to provide quality benefits. Typically, all retail is not part-time. Only about 29%, according to the National Retail Federation, is retail jobs. So that leaves quite a big number of full-time jobs there. And those retail jobs, part-time, are a perfect fit. Fit for college students, retirees. And so it's a good thing. It provides a need. And Also, there's 6 in 10 store employees, according to a survey by National Retail Federation, are promoted, and 8 out of 10 retail store employees are quote unquote happy with their job. So there is a lot to be said for retail jobs.
No, absolutely. And it's it fills a gap for some of those that, only want a part-time job or only have a part-time job. We've talked about Chick-fil-A a lot, but they've kind of led the market in terms of taking care of your employees, especially during, pre-COVID, when we were at near all-time low unemployment rates, that it was a competitive market that, rates have raised. I know Chick-fil-A in most areas start at $15 an hour, and, and they give bonuses for, good grades and everything for high school students. That there are some really, really good retail jobs out there, even if they are part-time. And you hear stories all the time about how they ultimately promote them to, CFO and COO, years down the road. There's another one this week that was announced. So it's definitely not, what it may have been in the past.
Another question we have come in is that, is it all about recruiting national brands, or can retail fit into a community's entrepreneurial development strategy?
Yeah, and this is something that we work at a lot. We kind of got a small business 360 program that's focused on the entrepreneurship side of it. It's certainly different in terms of recruitment, as entrepreneurs don't necessarily, it's not a Rolodex of people looking to start a business you can go call like there is for, McDonald's of the world. But you can prepare for them. You can say, hey, these are, like I said, Aaron said, the data for existing businesses. You can put together programs, say, if you are interested in opening a business, these are our high leakage categories. And then you can promote and host events and say, hey, these are the type of things that we're lacking. These are the type of pieces that would work well, that we would like to see in our downtown. So when they do self-identify as an entrepreneur, stick their head up, you can make sure, hey, you can grab them and not let them go, that, hey, this is what we can do to help you get started. And on the same side, on kind of the smaller ones that have 2 or 3 locations across the state, Elizabeth's Pizza, Rib Eyes Steakhouse, or just kind of a few to North Carolina. Those are the ones that you can still go and approach them. And maybe there's an extra family member looking to get into the business, and kind of do it from a non-traditional recruitment sense. So it's just a little bit different, but you can definitely still influence those and be ready for the independent businesses to work on the downtown side of it, because it's just as important for independent and downtown businesses to move forward and thrive.
The other question, that's great answer. The other question we've talked about, a couple questions about cell phone data and the source of that data. I know we at Electric Cities have just done a subscription to Placer AI. We chose that company to provide us the platform for cell phone data, and it's amazing what that data can tell you. And so we're excited about getting started on that particular program and rolling that out as a service to our members.
Right.
The key with cell phone data, as you mentioned, Jennings, is just having it, but then it's figuring out how to package that for specific retailers and restaurants. Because what happens is, Chick-fil-A wants to see something different than, let's say, Publix does. So the way that you package that information is going to be key as part of your recruitment strategy. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, and we use Placer as well, and Uber Media as well, that kind of highlight that. And just to clarify on some of the cell phone data, it's basically any time that your phone uses location data, you're being tracked, and it's stuff that you've opted into, whether you know it or not. And it's all anonymous, so they don't know, who it is or what they're doing. It's all in aggregate. So we like to clarify that with what we do in the cell phone study. No one's tracking who it is. It's just in aggregate, we know which areas are hot spots for customers.
Sounds great. All right, thank you guys so much for the question and answer period. These are great. And again, I'll turn it back over to Sandy to finish us up.
Thank you, Jennings, so much. I appreciate it. And thank you to Aaron and to Charles for your insights and that valuable overview. From the looks of the questions and the chats, it looks like everybody was engaged, and it is certainly spurring on a lot of thoughts about retail recruitment and quality of place and how all this can intersect with us in economic development. So, and thank you to Jennings for moderating today and doing a fabulous job. I would like to offer one last shout out to the sponsors that we listed earlier. Support from these organizations and companies is critical to everything that NCEDA does. Special thanks, of course, to Electricities for sponsoring this webinar series. It will continue, so if you like this one, join us Tuesday, February the 16th at 11 o'clock. When we'll hear from Lacey Beasley, who is with Retail Strategies LLC. Lacey is prominent in retail economic development, and she will pick up on this timely topic. So be on the lookout in your emails for additional information regarding this. Registration is now open also for the NCEDA Virtual Spring Conference that will be held on March the 17th. So check your emails or the NCEDA website to register and to be with this group and a larger group again. Also be on the lookout for additional webinar offerings. I'd just like to say thanks to Liz and to Lawrence and to Emily for working so hard to put this together and keeping us all organized so that we can share this information with the group. And in the meantime, stay safe. And thanks again for being with us here today.